Hey folks, we're going to do a little extra practice in this video of picking out the features we need to in order to identify a few different rocks. So I've got my list of characteristics and I'll keep that handy. And just as a guideline, you probably want to try and notice things that are actually on the list. So they might be true or might be untrue for your rock sample. But if I were to only notice things that don't show up anywhere on this list, I'm not going to have a very easy time picking out which type of rock we're dealing with. I am going to write down a few examples here. Oops, kind of all over the place here. I'll write down a few examples of some rocks that we can identify. So the first one, shown on the screen here, first thing I notice is that it has two different colors and they're pretty well speckled throughout. So I'm going to put that in my evidence. Two different colors, speckles throughout. And it looks to me like there isn't one particular area where I have like all the dark stuff over here and all the light stuff over here. It seems like it's pretty well mixed on this. Now, I also know that the speckles that form in this, they could be the result of crystals, and so I'll kind of take a look for some shine on this, and I see, well, it doesn't show up especially well in the video, but there are little shiny bits here. Looks to me like the darker colored mineral is kind of shiny. I don't see much from the lighter colored mineral, but that shininess to me says those are probably crystals that formed. So these look like they are small crystals, again, throughout. I guess I don't need to specify that one again. All right. I also will point out some things that I don't see on this. So, for example, I don't see or feel separate pieces of this. Like, a sedimentary rock will have all the little bits of sand or gravel or whatever, and you can often feel the grit for that. I don't feel anything like that here. I mean, it's not a perfectly smooth surface, but when I touch like one of these dark colored bumps or one of these dark colored areas, it doesn't feel like a separate bump from the lighter colored stuff. So the texture doesn't seem to have anything to do with the dark versus light color. So I'm just going to put in here that it doesn't feel like separate chunks. And we'll just kind of go through our table here. We've got, let's see, it doesn't feel like separate chunks, so I was thinking about the sedimentary on that one, so it doesn't seem like it's sedimentary. As for metamorphic, if we had separate chunks in a metamorphic ones, then they would be molded together, so we wouldn't necessarily be able to feel the separate pieces, so that kind of makes sense still. If it were a foliated metamorphic rock, I would see parallel ribbon-like mineral streaks, and I don't really see any of that here. I do notice that some of these speckles have kind of an elongated shape to them. They're not perfectly circular. I can see some over here that are oriented in this direction. But up here I see some that are oriented this way, some that are oriented this way, some that are oriented this way. So the long direction is the direction I've been pointing. So that seems like it's pretty randomly oriented. I don't see anything that would say streaks on this to me. Random orientation of the crystals or the chunks, whatever we want to call those. So certainly not foliated. The non-foliated, the blocky mineral chunks, I don't know if I'd describe those as blocky. They're pretty small and speckly, so maybe not the right size there, though we can have some small crystals. Usually all one color, and we certainly don't see that here, so that maybe is a red flag that we're not dealing with non-foliated either. So we kind of eliminated metamorphic there too. Let's see how our description so far fits with igneous then. So it's well mixed. We've got the same composition and the same mix of colors and materials all over. That seems to fit okay. Large crystals are arranged randomly, usually a different color than the rest of the rock, and that does seem to fit with what I'm seeing here. The difference between large and small crystals is really just, can we see them unaided? So I would say that these are probably large crystals. They're not gigantic or anything, but I can definitely see them without a microscope or a magnifying glass. On the extrusive side, uh, we do have the larger crystals than what I would expect here. We, maybe would describe those as speckles. Bubbles, no. Glassy texture, no, definitely not. So I guess I'm torn between the intrusive and the extrusive on this one. Do I describe these as large crystals or as small crystals? Since I'm not having any trouble distinguishing them, distinguishing the crystals, I'm going to think of those as large crystals. So let me write down my thinking on this. So for my reasoning, two different colors. That doesn't actually tell me a whole lot. It's a mix of materials, but all rocks are mixes of materials, so that doesn't get me super far there. Speckles throughout, though, that says to me it's probably, well, it's well mixed. It's multiple different materials, and it doesn't seem to have any patterns to it. So no patterns suggest to me that it's probably not a foliated metamorphic. And the patterns we often see in sedimentary also, the bands in sedimentary. So I'm not really seeing any layers like sedimentary. For 3, the well mixed, that says to me that these were probably mixed as a liquid. And the only rock that would have the materials mixing as a liquid is the one that cools from lava or magma. And so that makes me think igneous, mixed. Mitid, even better. There we go. Let's see, small crystals of a darker color. They're small, but I am able to see these, without any extra magnification on this. So I don't know. I think I'm going to reclassify how I named this. They're not really the size that would make me think really, really small crystals. So large enough to see crystals anyway. And that's making me think that it took a long time to cool, which puts me at an intrusive igneous rock. Doesn't feel like separate chunks, so probably not sediments that are cemented together. So not sedimentary. And the random orientation of crystals or chunks, again, makes me think no patterns. So probably not foliated metamorphic. And we have the multiple different colors. So I'm going to add up here mix of materials, but also the multiple colors makes me think probably not a non-foliated metamorphic, because those ones are generally just going to be one color. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so what am I left with then if I've ruled out sedimentary and I've ruled out metamorphic? I'm stuck with igneous then. So it's just a difference in crystal size that helps me decide this. And the crystals are big enough to distinguish pretty plainly. They seem to be arranged randomly, so we do have some that are kind of flattened out in one direction or another, but no clear patterns there. So the randomness to that makes me think probably an intrusive igneous rock. Claim intrusive igneous rock. Done. Doesn't need a period. All right, let's do another one here. Okay, so this next one, zoom in just a little bit. Oh, it's some nice lines on the screen there. Okay, so this one has some pretty odd shapes to it, but one thing that ought to stand out, All right. Well, we'll deal with the little lines, I guess. One thing that ought to stand out to us is that we have this chunk right in here and another one right here that have a pretty characteristic shape that looks to me like a seashell. And if I look right here, that seems to be an imprint from a seashell also. And if I look back on this side, I see some individual pieces here that seem to be stuck to each other, but those all look like maybe they came from seashells as well. So on this side, I see little bits of sand throughout, and everything seems to be held together with this kind of gray stuff throughout. So that's looking to me pretty early on like it's going to be, well, the only type of rock that I would expect to see living things in, which would be a biochemical sedimentary rock. But let's go ahead and fill out our evidence and our reasoning and such. Okay, so evidence one, well, I'm seeing shells. That stands out to me right away. I also am seeing bits of sand. Everything seems to be connected by a separate gray material. Okay. It's certainly not uniform. I'm able to see distinct separate pieces within this thing. I do see some holes in this, but the holes all seem to be linked to where those shell pieces are. So I'm not thinking bubbles on this. I'm just thinking little bits of shell that have crumbled over the years or whatever. I'm going to jump into my reasoning then. So the shells, right away, I'm thinking it's a fossil. So I'm thinking biochemical, sedimentary. And really all I have to do for the rest of this, since I wouldn't expect to see shells anywhere else, I'm just going to add support to this argument. I don't expect my idea to change here. Bits of sand. Well, sediment would indicate to me that we have a sedimentary rock connected by a separate gray material. The gray stuff would be the cement that holds everything together. Again, thinking a sedimentary rock. And then the distinct separate pieces, well, sedimentary rocks are formed and separate pieces are cemented together. So again, thinking sedimentary rock on this one. So this is much more cut and dry. We're thinking here that we've got a biochemical sedimentary rock. Bam. All right, last one. All right, this is a pretty little speckly, sparkly one. So if I look on the sides, I can see this gray line that kind of goes through. There's a few of them, actually. Sort of speckly, but they're definitely going in some kind of a pattern. I notice I don't see any gray marks going up and down here. It's all just left to right on this. And if I move over on this side, I see the same sort of pattern here. It doesn't look like this line right here goes all the way through. I see that it stops before we get over to this side. Same thing up here. We have this line right here that stops pretty abruptly. So I'm not really thinking layers on this. Instead, I'm thinking streaks. And it looks like this one does about the same thing. So it's a couple of different materials at least. It's a pretty sparkly one. Again, maybe it doesn't show up great on the video, but we got a lot of sparkles in here. So we are thinking crystals for this, but all different rocks can have crystals. The fact that I'm seeing those streaks is leading me to one conclusion right away on this. So let's get a little bit of our thoughts down here. So first off, we see two colors, but they are not randomly mixed. Up. Instead, we're seeing streaks of the darker color within the lighter color. And our crystals, or shiny little crystals, seem to line up along those streaks. I really just see those two colors. I don't see distinct pieces, chunks within the rock, so I'm not really thinking sedimentary on this one. I also don't see the randomly oriented crystals or the random speckles on this one, so I'm also not thinking igneous on this. So, two colors. Again, we're dealing with any rock, could have two different colors to it here, although probably not a non-foliated metamorphic. Those ones generally are just a single color, not always, but generally. Not randomly mixed, so I'm thinking then probably not mixed as a liquid. So I'm thinking not an igneous rock on this one. We have streaks of darker color, and I'm just going to add that those streaks are wavy. They aren't real straight lines. As we look at the side here, got kind of some wavy patterns throughout this. So not the super flat layers of sedimentary rock. So this makes us think that it's been sort of morphed or stretched as it formed, which makes me think particularly foliated metamorphic. Okay, the crystals line up along those streaks. Again, this leads me to alignment of crystals makes me think foliated metamorphic. No distinct chunks makes me think it's not separate pieces cemented together. So probably not sedimentary. All right. So everything is kind of pointing me in the same direction on this one too. I think this one then is a foliated metamorphic rock. Okay. So hopefully you found a little extra practice useful there.